Hello, welcome to Secure the Continent, New Central Television with me, Benga Aborowa. Before we get into the topic for today's show, I'll first bring you the latest security headlines across the continent. The United States issues security warning on possible terror attacks in Nigeria and South Africa. 2 Islamic State militants executed in Mogadishu, Somalia. And in West Africa, Burkina Faso recruits 50,000 civilians to fight jihadists. And at least 50 killed in Chad protests as police clash with demonstrators. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back after this break. Today on Secure the Continent, we will be looking into the situation in Sudan, where at least 230 people have been killed and more than 200 injured in attacks on villages in the Blue Nile state over the past few days. We do know that the political unrest and economic crisis in Sudan have escalated across Sudan since last year's military coup led by the country's Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. But what is the cause of this new ethnic violence? We have more details for you in this report.
Renewed hostilities in Bilal, East Sudan have claimed the lives of dozens of civilians. The recent violence broke out between members of the Hausa people and rival groups, most notably the Berta and al-Mahi tribe in the al-Mahi in the Sudan Blue Nile state. The hostilities first broke out in July, leaving over 100 dead and dozens severely wounded. In an interview on Sudan TV, Blue Nile's governor Ahmed Al-Amda said the issue began 2 months ago when the Hausa demanded that they be included in Blue Nile's regional administration. The Sudanese Hausa tribe are part of a much larger Hausa ethnic group, which is particularly prominent in West Africa. The Berta tribe, mostly resident in Sudan-Ethiopia border, joined the popular movement fighting the central government in Khartoum in the mid-90s and has remained unreceptive towards the Hausa community. Tribal chiefs from rival groups had agreed to cease hostilities. In spite of the deal, clashes broke out again in September, leaving at least 18 people dead. The United Nations says the bouts of violence in Blue Nile state have displaced about 37,700 people. If security breaks down in the Blue Nile region, the area may soon become engulfed in violence from the militia groups opposing the Ethiopian government. Security experts worry that such conflict may spread over into the Ethiopian Benin-Shangul-Gumuz region, where Addis Ababa is building a Renaissance dam that has stretched the limits of water diplomacy on the continent. Sudan's deepening political unrest and spiraling economic crisis is compounded by the near-weekly pro-democracy protest and a violent crackdown by military leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. The concerted search for peace continues.
Now, joining us to discuss the situation in the Blue Nile state in Sudan, I have Dr. Majdeline El-Tahir. She's a Sudanese political activist. I also have Gamal Nasser, African studies researcher, who joins us from Ankara, the Turkish capital. And also Steve Paterno, a research analyst consultant, will be joining us via phone later from South Sudan. One welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Secure the Continent.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start with Dr. El-Tahir. Reports say at least 200 people have been killed in 2 days of ethnic clashes in Sudan's Blue Nile state. What's the current situation of things there?
Good evening to you, and thank you for inviting me to the program. The current situation is very volatile. The statistics which you have just pointed out are true. There are about 230 people killed just in the last couple of weeks. Additionally, there are 117 who were killed in July. Hundreds were injured, plus thousands, mounting up to 37,000 refugees, both internally to other states near the Blue Nile in the Sudan and across the border to Ethiopia. This has been just in the matter of the last two months from July until now. The situation is very volatile. I have shared with you a video which circulated in Sudanese social media today of the police forces in Ad-Damazin, which is the capital of the
Blue Nile
state
state.
of the Blue Nile state, and whereby the police is encouraging, the chief of the police is encouraging the police officers to shoot to kill as a means of resolving the conflict.
So the situation is not any way solved yet. It's still very delicate.
It is still very delicate. I would not be surprised at all, unfortunately and sadly, to see it escalating even further in the coming weeks.
Okay, thank you, Dr. El-Tahir. I'd like to bring in Ibrahim in Ankara. Now, Ibrahim, this is not the first time deadly clashes will be reported in the Blue Nile state. Earlier this year, around July, there were clashes in Blue Nile. What do you think is responsible for the latest uptick in violence, and what are the roots of this conflict, this current conflict we're witnessing in the Blue Nile state?
Oh, that's great. First of all, I want to thank you for having me, and I am delighted to be with you. Actually, according to the local resources, the situation is currently under control, but can deteriorate at any moment. Actually, now the government, the local authorities declared a state emergency, and they took some security measures, but I think the situation is still, I totally agree with the other guest. He said the situation is volatile, and actually now the main reason behind this is not about the security situation. Actually, the people of the Blue Nile, they live for years in harmony, and they integrated. But now the main problem, or the main issue, or the main crisis is in Sudan. Actually, there is no central government. There is no political consensus or political agreement between the civil and the military. So this is why the situation in Sudan is going worse day by day. Now we are talking about Blue Nile, but last months or in the last weeks, there is a conflict between the tribes in southern Kordofan, in Lagawa. Actually, there are many of innocent people were killed in this conflict, and now we are talking about the Blue Nile. Actually, the problem is not on the local communities. The problem is in the central, in Khartoum, the elites, the political elites, and the civilians, and military group, the military leader, they don't care about the innocent people, and they don't care about the situation in Sudan. Now we need to solve the political crisis, then we can talk about the security, and we can solve it, this kind of crisis very soon. Actually, Sudan, I mean the military headquarters, I mean al-Burhan, don't care about the situation in the other areas. He tried to took control of Khartoum. I tried to impose his power in Khartoum, but the situation in the other regions, it's going, it's volatile, and it actually the security crisis and the economic crisis is uprising every day actually.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I would like to bring back Dr. El Tahir. Ibrahim did mention Khartoum, but I would like you, for the sake of our viewers, to give us some historical perspective to this conflict. Has there always been conflict in the Blue Nile state? Because did these disagreements happen when Omar al-Bashir was president? And looking at the response, the governor of Blue Nile State, Ahmed al-Omdabadi, declared a state of emergency in the state for 30 days. What has been the response from Khartoum to the latest violence? So that's the second part of my question. What's the historical antecedent of this conflict in the Blue Nile State in South Kordofan? And what's the government's response from Khartoum?
Going to the first part of your question about the historical background, the historical background is such that tribal rights for grazing and rights for water has always been an issue between different tribes in the Sudan. There were two systems which were in place which controlled and kept these conflicts in check. The first one is the tribal system itself. In the olden days, the tribal system, the tribal chiefs would meet, compensations will be paid, and the conflict is, and agreements are reached, and the conflict is contained. Secondly, is the role of the central government, because the central government and the military of the Sudan and the police of the Sudan was one unified unit. Then it has an authority, the state had an authority over the different regions. And it could cover those regions, that be South Kordofan, as the speaker mentioned here, or the South Kordofan, or the Blue Nile, or Darfur. So the state had a control. Currently, that is historically speaking, and that's what kept the conflicts under check. But currently, there are two elements which are very important to address here. The first element is the collapse of the Sudanese state. The Sudanese state is in a complete shambles. The military of the Sudan has been reduced to the margin, to being one part of 8 different militias and military forces in the Sudan. There are 8 at the moment. The traditional military of the Sudan is just only one of 8. The second thing is international companies and international and regional interests in these resources. Like I said previously, we're talking about resources as in grazing and water resources. Now here we are talking about mining and water itself, not water for cattle and for grazing, but we're talking about, mind you, the region where there is the conflict is only 15 kilometers, and I repeat, only 15 kilometers away from the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the Great Renaissance Dam of Ethiopia, with all its geopolitical complications, which I don't want to get into. However, it's very, very relevant to that. The mining rights and the minerals of the Sudan are very much part of this conflict. This is what has been symptomatic of all conflicts in the Sudan. The collapse of the state together with the interference of international companies. Usually, these international companies operate under national names, but the end beneficiary is some international company, that be in the Gulf or in Europe, that is the end beneficiary of this whole conflict.
Now, Dr. El Tahir, permit me to interrupt you here. You did say the government in Khartoum is one of several militias, but international organizations and some countries do have diplomatic relations with Sudan, in spite of the fact that it truncated its transition program and it has a military leader in the person of General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. What is Khartoum currently doing to address this latest round of conflict in the Blue Nile state? Have they sent troops to keep the peace? What else have they done to, just de-escalate the situation?
They have sent, again, they have sent rapid response forces, which is one of the militias, deployment of heavy deployment. They have, there was heavy deployment of SPLA, which is the SPLM North, which is another militia. Now we're talking about 3. So the central government army, the rapid response forces army under Himeti, plus the SPLM North under Malik Aqar. They all have been having heavy deployment in the region. Traditionally, the militias now, they are moving into a new tactic. And the new tactic is arming non-traditional tribal allies. Let's say a leader of a militia is from a specific tribe. You would see very often lately that they start arming a different type of tribe. And then this is a pattern. If you follow it closely in the Sudan, you will see it. This pattern is that conflict will erupt, okay? The government will deploy the different militias. They will deploy reinforcement, military reinforcement. Then there will be a lot of killing and displacement. And the place is being taken by whoever militia is winning and the strongest. And then comes the international companies. And then comes the mining. This has been a pattern now for the last decade in the Sudan. Systematically, that be in the north of Sudan, in the east of Sudan, in Darfur, or now in the Nuba in the Blue Nile state.
Thank you very much, Dr. El-Tahir. So we see it's a very complex situation there in Sudan. It's not just tribes fighting themselves. There's also economic and business interests. And now, Ibrahim, several hundred people demonstrated in the Blue Nile state capital, Damazin, in the wake of the attacks, calling on the governor to be sacked and accused him of not protecting them. My question to you, Ibrahim, is this. What is your take on this, and how much power, because we just heard Dr. El-Tahir talk about what the central government in Khartoum does. It's deployed the Rapid Reaction Force, it's deployed the Sudanese State Army, and other people to help address the conflict. In Sudan, how much power do the state governors have to protect themselves? And is it really the fault of the governor of Blue Nile State? How much power does he have to prevent the conflict from escalating?
Okay. First of all, well, let me analyze the security situation from different perspectives. Now we are immersed ourselves in the internal factor of the Sudan. Inside Sudan, there is many crises that we can talk about. The absence of the government is the main reason behind this, in my humble opinion. But actually, there is external factor we have to talk about. We have to analyze it when we are talking about the situation in Blue Nile and in Sudan in general. I think the situation there is a different. There is external factor that we need to focus it on. For example, now Sudan has a dispute between Ethiopia with Ethiopia in the border, and Ethiopia recently have blamed Sudan for supporting the rebel group in northern Ethiopia. Yeah. So there is Ethiopia, in my opinion, Ethiopia tried to impose try to reciprocate Sudan policy toward Ethiopia, and now try to, I think, there are some resources and local resources say that Ethiopia support the local group and they support their tribes against each other to make a turmoil in Sudan. This is some resources, some analysis that I'm here with. And
now, what about the state governors? How much power do they have? Because people are calling for
I come to your. I want to respond that. So now the Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the other military group, the military leader, I mean Himeti, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who's who is the leader of the militia, one of the militia in Sudan, try to impose his power on the Sudanese people. And now they don't care about the conflict that's going on in Darfur and in northern Sudan. And now the government must, first of all, must solve the problem, the conflict with the civilians. Then they can send some kind of group, some military. Now they appointed a new general that can lead with this situation. Now I think that the political turmoil spend the effort of the military leaders to try to control the state in Khartoum, and they don't care about, as I mentioned, they don't care about the situation in the other places. Now the governor Ahmed al-Umda must resign. Then we must re-control or re-talk about or discuss again about the Juba.
But Ibrahim, if
the government can send some groups to the region, to the Blue Nile region, but the problem depend on, or it's not about the security, about the security institutions. As a problem focuses on the local communities, that we must lead a kind of negotiation between the local communities, and they can discuss their problems peacefully.
Who will lead this talks, so that somebody needs to drive this peace talk, so the local communities can have this discussion. You also mentioned a point about the governor resigning. If he resigns, it's the same Khartoum that will appoint a new governor. So are you not having more of the same situation here?
Actually, the situation is Khartoum is not different from the region, from the Blue Nile. Now the situation in Khartoum, there is no a kind of peace. The crimes rate is increasing day by day in Khartoum. Now the problem is not focused only about the situation in the Blue Nile, the situation in general in Sudan. I mean in Khartoum, and we first of all we need to solve the problem in Khartoum. Then we can solve the problem in Blue Nile by a national dialogue between the groups or between the local communities.
Okay, Ibrahim, before I move to Dr. Tahir, some analysts have said last year's coup, and you did mention General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan in your analysis. Some experts have said last year's coup led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan created a security vacuum that fostered a resurgence in violence, that because Khartoum is not stable and there are questions about the legitimacy of the authorities in Khartoum, that has led to a rise in violence. What's your take on this? And is there any solid connection?
Actually, you are right. Yeah. Now the problem is political. Now we have many security institutions. Now the police headquarters, they don't do their duty properly, and now we have to rebuild our security institution with a new perspective. And Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, he took control, or he took the authority or the regime, the rule in last year. Now he doesn't have any plan to solve the Sudanese crisis. Now he is not the true leader that can lead us or lead Sudan to create a new system or to build a peace in Sudan. Now we have to discuss as the Sudanese, as the civilians, with each other, and we start to talk about the situation, and we must solve. I mean, the political parties must come together and discuss about the economical crisis and the other situations. If we solve the political situation or the political crisis, and we can solve the other problem very soon. And actually, the problem is not about the Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. The problem is about the absence of the political view to solve the internal situation in Sudan. We have to lead. We have to create a new situation, and we discuss. All the Sudanese must discuss with each other. To find a different solution, and we have to solve our problems with our neighbors. I mean, with Ethiopia and with South Sudan and with Chad also, and with Egypt. And after that, we can talk about the peace. We can start to building the peace inside Sudan, and we can integrate. And also, we have to create a kind of institution that can solve our national integration. The main problem in Sudan is about the national integration. And now the people are not well integrated. Now we are talking about the indigenous people and who is come from outside, like the Hausa. And recently we talked about the Bani Amir in the Eastern Sudan, and in Chad also we are talking, in Darfur also. The people, the local communities, they don't accept the others. They are talking about there is the differentiation between the local community, and we have to rebuild our nation state with the new perspective, and we find our political situation, and we solve this kind of dispute peacefully, and we must stop. We must solve the problems without any intervention from the outside or from the external powers.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. Dr. Tahir, Ibrahim did mention national integration, that Sudan, that there's not a lot of national integration. You've had the Hausa community, for example, live there for hundreds of years, and they don't have rights to land, and some of them don't even have citizenship. So my question to you, Dr. Tahir, is have there been any efforts made in the past towards mediating and improving the relationship between the Hausa and the Burta in the Blue Nile state?
Well, these are all legitimate, very legitimate grievances, and the question of integration, coexistence in the Sudan between the different ethnicities, tribes, and groups is a very fundamental one, and needs to be addressed within a wider framework of peace negotiations, of accountability, and between the grassroots. Unfortunately, with the conflicts in the Sudan, the different conflicts in the Sudan, the peace negotiations are always made by leaders, among the leaders themselves, and they never actually reach the grassroots. They never address the root problems, the latest of which is the Juba peace agreement, rather than the Juba peace agreement October 2020, which was signed October 2020, rather than addressing any of these root problems. And one of the main ones is development as well, schools, hospitals, and rights, like you said, citizenship rights, ownership rights, etc. They were not addressed. What it was a question of different militia groups and leaders who divided among themselves the ministerial positions in Khartoum. Most of the leaders of these militias speak in the tongue of their tribes, but they live in Khartoum, and they have houses and villas and etc. outside the country in very many different places. Very rarely and seldom do they visit their people in the
So who appointed them leaders if they're not attending this peace meetings, and if they're not representing the interest of the people? Because from the picture you just painted, it's almost like they're just leaders by name and they're doing it for their own personal interest, while the ordinary people in these places are the ones that are the victims of this cycle of violence and conflict.
Absolutely, and I give you an example. There are tribes which they're said to be privileged. Yes, relatively, maybe perhaps they are privileged, but the fact of the matter is that statistically speaking, over 80% of the people of the Sudan live under the poverty line. the level of illiteracy is very, very high across tribes. So in practical terms, these privileges of certain tribes over others only exist among the elites. It doesn't exist among ordinary people. A poor northern Sudanese of lighter skin is just as poor as a Hausa in the Blue Nile. And it's just as needy, and it's just for a school, for a hospital. If you go to the furthest north of the Sudan, in the areas of the Nubians, you will see extreme poverty. If you go anywhere in the Sudan, you will see extreme poverty. Inside Khartoum, the capital, there is extreme poverty. This kind of like tribal hierarchy is just a myth which exists only among the elites.
Okay, it's a fine place to go on a break, and we will address this tribal violence. What's stoking this violence, and who are the individuals or groups responsible for this? And then we prefer solutions to it in the second half. I'd like to say thank you to Gamal Nasser. He won't be joining us in the second half, and we'll continue our discussion then. You're watching Secure the Continent on News Central Television. Where we come back, we'll continue our discussion on the rising ethnic conflict in the Sudanese state of Blue Nile. You stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Secure the Continent and News Central Television. Thanks for staying with us. If you're just joining, this is Secure the Continent, and we've been discussing the rising ethnic violence in Sudan's Blue Nile state. We still have with us here Dr. Majdeline El-Tahir. She's a Sudanese political analyst. Now, Dr. Majdeline, before we went on that break, we were talking about the causes of the conflict and what have you. Now, some people have suggested that this conflict, as bad as it is, might be in the interest of certain individuals or groups. So I want to ask you if there are any individuals that are responsible or groups for this violence, keeping Sudan the way it is, you know, with ethnic groups going against each other. Is there anything to gain from keeping them divided? And who are these groups and these individuals? What could they possibly gain from all of this senseless violence?
To start with, we start with the people who are in power now in Khartoum. They hold the country hostage. They are a very small number of individuals by name and everything. And they basically are the outcome of which I started before the break, and that is the Juba Peace Agreement. And the Juba Peace Agreement, what it did, among other damages that it had done, is the fact that it brought militias into the country. And there are, like I said, 8 different armies in the country. The heads of each and every of these armies is a member of the current Sovereign Council of the Sudan. These are the people who are responsible for everything that is happening in the Sudan. It's not at the local level that there is a shared responsibility at the local level, but you have to ask yourself the question: who provides the weapons? who provides the deployment, who provides the vehicles to this senseless killing, which which is what it is, senseless killing. It is the government in Khartoum who holds the threads to all of this. That's where we should start. The second most important thing, violence in the Sudan will never stop so long as there is no accountability. Killings in the Sudan has been happening for decades and decades, and there is no accountability or anyone face any repercussions or consequences. Now, we repeatedly say that it is not just because morally it's important, psychologically it's important, for the healing of the nation it's important. Most important is so that the crime is not repeated. The militias leaders, they come one after another, and they continue doing the same thing because there is no accountability. And there is a joint responsibility of the political system in the Sudan, which did, specifically during the period 2019 until the coup d'etat last year. The three governments of Dr. Abdullah Hamdok failed to bring justice, failed to hold Bashir and the remnants of Bashir regime, to hold them responsible. This has opened the appetite of further more gamblers to gamble with people's life. The second body which is responsible is the international community. Now, the international community, there are two bodies which are bringing together peace negotiations in the Sudan between the civilians and the military as we speak. And the one is the Trilateral Committee, consisting of IGAD, the African Union, yes, and the United Nations. And the second one is the Quadro. And the Quadro are the ambassadors of Great Britain, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and the United States.
Why do you bring these international bodies into? One would think, you know, the whole world's interest would be to end the senseless killings in Sudan. But I get the African Union and all this, and the members of the international community. Do you mention their name because they're not putting enough pressure on Khartoum to get on with the transition program, or are they enabling General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Emeti, and his friends?
I wouldn't go as far as to say enabling, but they certainly are not putting enough pressure. And for example, all negotiations, including the infamous Juba Peace Agreement of 2020, and the negotiations now that are ongoing, there are three things which are missing. And these three things are very fundamental if the Sudan is ever to get out of this dilemma: the economic dilemma, the security dilemma, and eventually be able to deal with the identity dilemma. These three issues, which are never brought into the table, is the economic power of the military. The military holds about 87%, according to Hamdok himself. He's an economist, former Prime Minister Hamdok.
Yes.
87% of the country's resources are under the army, and they're controlled by army companies. This has never been brought into the negotiation table. The fact that the resources of the country should be under the Ministry of Finance, and the resources of the country are belonging to the state. It does not belong to the military. The second one is the fact that the military of the Sudan has all the economy, and the second one is the accountability. There is not once there was a single mention of accountability. It's always that power sharing deal, whereby, as we speak now, there is talk about the power sharing deal. And we go from one power sharing deal to the next, whereby civilians come in as figure bodies, but they do not have actual any authority, because all the economic power and the military power is with the military. And this question of lack of accountability will never end the violence cycle. This vicious cycle will never end as long as there is no accountability. Lately and of late, the international community started mentioning in a very shy way the question of accountability. And I repeat, in a very shy way. And when they do, it is surrounded by big ambiguity, legal ambiguities as to who and how and so on. So the question of accountability is not there. The question of accountability...
Dr. When you mention accountability, do you mean accountability for justice, for the protesters that have been killed, for those responsible for the violence and the resources of the state? What exactly, what aspect of accountability are you referring to?
I am talking about justice for the victims, justice for the state. When you embezzle so much of the country's resources, that's a crime against the state. When so many killings and senseless killings are in place, that is a crime. This kind of accountability and justice, that's what I'm talking about. But there is always an immunity clause in these peace negotiations. So long as there is immunity, there is just never an end to this cycle.
Now let's talk about the humanitarian situation of this conflict in the Blue Nile state. What are some of the effects on the people, the residents, the ordinary people living in the Blue Nile state of this deadly cycle of violence?
Like I said, huge numbers of internally displaced people. They also displaced to other countries, to Kenya, Uganda, and mostly Ethiopia, because it's just across the border from Ethiopia. And the people's lives is very, very hard and difficult, and it was hard and difficult as it is before the eruption of this last violence. The economic situation in the Sudan, especially in rural Sudan, like the Blue Nile state, is very, very dire, and people are suffering a lot, and prices of everything is going through the roof. And the government had no vision, no plan whatsoever in dealing with either the economic crisis or the security crisis. What it is that they are always just buying time to stay in power, continue serving their own interests, and I repeat, the interests of the companies that are behind them.
Now, Dr. Otohir, from our discussion tonight, and going by everything you know about Sudan and the way this government works, do you have any concerns that this conflict might broaden in terms of area and actors, and is there a likelihood of more violence? Is the likelihood of more violence significant? Is there a propensity for violence, looking at the present situation of things?
I had very, very much to say yes, it is, because it is in a very sensitive area, in an area between the borders of Sudan and Ethiopia, and as it is the area of Bani Shangul in Ethiopia. These are tribes of Sudanese origin, and these tribes have, again, from the Ethiopian side of things, have felt very often that they are marginalized and they do not have very much say in the central government in Addis Ababa. Plus the fact that the Ethiopian Great Renaissance Dam, and it has huge geopolitical
implications.
Geopolitical consequences and associations. This dam is 15 kilometers away from the conflict area that I'm talking about. So as such, the situation, particularly in that area, is very complex. But there is another dimension which I didn't mention. This is just at the borders of South Sudan. And part of the region, part of the area is under the control of the SPLM, one faction, and the other one is in this faction. So the part of Malik Aqar, of SPLM North Malik Aqar, this is working together with Hemeti and al-Burhan and the central government of Sudan. Whereas On the other side, it is it's SPLM North Al-Hilu part, which brings again the
So it's not just the Sudanese problem, because when you look at that entire area, it's more like it's a tinderbox, and it could lead to serious geopolitical implications, like you mentioned. But now, just before we wrap things up, Dr. El-Tahir, you did mention. My question is this: the October 2020 Juba peace process did look very good on paper, but you've said, I mean, its implementation is different. It only benefits the major actors there, and it's not really getting to the people. There's also concerns about the people that have suggested that if Sudan democratizes and you have a transition, it will be able to address this issues, this long issues about discrimination and all of that. So what effect will a democratic Sudan have on reducing tribal clashes in Sudan? And is the October 2020 Juba peace process dead?
In practice, it is very much alive in the sense that there are still 8 armies in Sudan. I tell you what would be the solution whereby we can start. Economic reform. Moving 87% of the country's resources from the military to the people, to schools and to hospitals, this will stabilize the Sudan. This will heal some of the grievances. This kind of like positive discrimination to regions of conflict, compensations and accountability, all these kind of measures will actually resolve the problems of the Sudan. When we present the problems of the Sudan, it seems like we are presenting problems which are unsolvable, yet they are very solvable. If there is enough political will from the Sudanese people and from the international community, this is completely resolvable, because the number of people holding the Sudan back are much less than the number of people who you see out demonstrating, wanting a change peacefully. Economic, and I repeat, economics is at the heart of this one. Having schools, roads, hospitals in this area will stabilize this area.
Thank you very much, Dr. El-Tahir. It's a fine place to drop the anchor on today's program. I do appreciate your time and contribution, as always, here and Secure the Continent.
Thank you.
I would also like to say thank you to our second guest, Gamal Nasser, who joined us live from the Turkish capital, Ankara. Now, from our discussion tonight, we have understood that to reach a durable peace, both the government and international actors should start pursuing local piecemeal deals and abide by their repeated commitment to an inclusive national process. The national dialogue should also fully address the root causes of the conflict in the Blue Nile and other parts of Sudan, in particular the unequal relations between the center and the peripheries. Thank you very much for watching Secure the Continent today. I'm Benga Aborowa. Remember to stay safe and always be at alert. I'm Benga Aborowa. See you next time on Secure the Continent. Bye-bye.